And so good morning, my friends. I think I just need to take a moment and just speak to some presencing of this moment. And I just want to say thank you to Jamie for that song. As some of you already know, and for those of you who are in synthesis, and for those of you who remember Firefly Walter, who was our guest musician a while ago and one of my dearest friends in the world, was hit by a tram in Germany yesterday and is currently in a medically induced coma with a brain injury. And so when I told Jamie that this morning, he said, well, I definitely need to sing that song. And so I just say that because I need your support today, and so does she, to just be present to this moment. And just to presence where I'm at in this moment before we dive into the rest of today. So take another breath with me if you would. Thank you. And so, as many of you know, as we've been moving through 2022, this has been our year of inner and outer permaculture. And each month we've been exploring a different principle of permaculture and reframing it as spiritual principles for each one of us to look at how do we build a permanent culture of mind for ourselves that is renewable and brings us into a greater vision and greater sense of sustainability for our own lives. And this month, our principle, our theme that we are exploring is creatively use and respond to change. Thanks, Guy. Creatively use and respond to change. And so the first question I have is, how many of you feel absolutely comfortable and in love with change? Oh, good. There's about 6 of us. I appreciate that. How many of you find that when change comes your way, it's not always the most exciting thing, but also very energetic, right? Oftentimes, change comes with a whole lot. And so, I want us to begin this month by really embracing this idea that change is the nature of creation, right? That to exist is to change. Right? The one constant thing about life and about the universe is that it's always changing. Right? That's the one thing that we can count on being permanent, is change. Right? And change can be something that is beautiful, like the birth of a child or a new relationship or a great gift or a wonderful surprise. Right? But change can also be death. It can be the end of a relationship. It can be some kind of pain or trauma that comes into our life, or the great catastrophes that seem to be spinning around us in our world and our society. And, I think one of the things that Science of Mind offers us, that any spiritual tradition of mindfulness offers us, is to recognize that there is always a gift in that which is changing around us. And that when we can find the gift in a moment is when we can see the power of change, right? And I want us to just think for a moment just about the nature of the universe, the nature of evolution, the nature of life itself. And think about the 14 billion years of the universe's life. Right? It has been consistently shifting and changing, right? Everything that makes up existence is always in this beautiful activity of reforming, storming, norming, shifting, changing, spinning, 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 right? And think about the life of the universe. It has evolved through epochs over millennia and billions of years. It seems to be standing still, and yet it is moving with great speed and change. Think about your bodies. The cells of your body, the particles that make up who you are constantly being shifted and changed, right? There's not a cell in your body that was there 7 years ago. The particles that make up your atoms, the molecules that make up your DNA, are made up of particles that are moving in and out of you in every moment. I kind of have this image sometimes that each one of us is like this energetic snowball that's rolling through the universe and sort of always dropping off parts of itself, but picking up new parts of itself. The ball is always there, but it's made out of different snow all the time, right? And think about your body as you shift and change through your life. It is never the same. Every day your body is slightly different than it was the day before. So change is the one thing that is truly happening within us, around us, all of the time. And yet, those atoms that make up you, that are constantly shifting through you, were born in supernovas billions of years ago. That the very atoms of hydrogen and helium and oxygen and carbon that make up you are the same elements that have been participating in every form that has existed for billions and billions of years. And so the substance of you is eternal and changeless, and yet it is moving through you in a way that is always changing. And if we can make friends with that and find the awe in that, that literally you are the universe in motion, that evolution is coursing through each one of us, there is great magic that is swirling around us and through us in every moment. And the beloved Erica Luckett used to say, and her and Lisa wrote in their song, if you're not in awe, you're not paying attention. Yes. There is so much beauty and magnificence in the truth of who we really are. And in the midst of shifting and changing circumstances with an ever-shifting and changing climate, I think it's incredibly important for us to recognize the beauty and the eternality that lives within us, that lives within that change, right? Because if we just look to the circumstances, to the effects, to the shifting and changing things that are in front of us, oftentimes it can be incredibly overwhelming. Oftentimes the change is too much or not changing in the direction that we want. But we have to recognize that change is continuous, that it never stops, right? And so even if things seem to be shifting in one direction, the great thing is it seems to me the universe operates in spirals and seems to move in a circle. And if it goes far enough in one direction, it's going to come around the other way eventually. Right? This shifting, spiraling, changing universe is always in motion. And we can make friends with that for ourselves. We can make friends with change. If we recognize that the nature of the universe is to constantly be in shift and change, then we can embrace the fact that each one of us is here meant to evolve. That we are meant to participate in that expansion and evolution. And that means that we have to pay deep attention to ourselves and see how it is that we respond to change when it comes our way. Are we willing to embrace it and move with it? Or do we get overwhelmed by it and want to shut down? Right? And really, if you think about change in many of our contexts, change is oftentimes comes with new awareness, with new information, right? As things come our direction and we learn more, we're exposed to more, we see things we didn't see before, the shifting and changing takes place. And I want us to think for a moment about changes in perception based on what we know, right? That I'm going to make up some numbers here, but you're going to get the general idea here that there are scientists and researchers that talk about the sum total of human knowledge, right? And that for the first, say, 10,000 years of human existence, we gained this much knowledge. We'll call it one amount of knowledge, right? And then in the next 2,000 years, we gained another that amount of knowledge. And then in the next 500 years, that same increase, right? And now we're living in a time where they're saying that the sum total of human knowledge is doubling something like every 4 or 6 weeks, right? It took 10,000 years for the sum total of human knowledge to double the first time. And this exponential curve is moving as we see more, learn more, know more about the universe, know more about ourselves. As we have 7, approaching 8 billion people on this planet seeking out new information and new ideas, the growth of our perception and our awareness and our perspective is exponentially growing, right? And have any of you ever had an awakening? Oh, good, a few of us. How about this? Have any of you ever had a moment in your life where you saw something that you didn't see before? We've all had awakenings. There we go. So, and this is what I want to say to us, is that our perspective should constantly be evolving. The thing that I love about the founder of Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes, is that he said this philosophy is to be open at the top. That we are grounded and rooted in certain principles. But he would be appalled if he saw how some of us 100 years later only want to stick to certain ways of speaking and doing about the philosophy. Ernest Holmes created a philosophy that was meant to evolve, that was meant to expand. And he said, as we take on new spiritual knowledge, as we learn more about the world, as we see more about ourselves, as we gain new spiritual technologies, this philosophy should shift and change and evolve and become something new that is a reflection of our expanding consciousness. Right? And so the Church of Religious Science eventually became the centers for spiritual living because there was an expansion of how we see ourselves, the way that we teach this philosophy, the way that we engage in these spiritual principles. Right? And so as we evolve, as we learn more, our perspectives should continuously shift and change. And what happens is if our circumstances evolve, if our life shifts, if the environment changes, and our perspective doesn't, we find ourselves in a state of cognitive dissonance. And that creates a whole lot of what we don't want, right? And I think what I see in the world is that we have a world that is evolving so rapidly that the sum total of human knowledge, knowing about the universe, about life, about who we are, about our effects on each other and the planet, are shifting and changing dramatically, and huge portions of our society are unwilling to grow into that new perception. Right? And so those of us who see and want to participate in that evolution, want to grow, want to call in a new vision, we're excited about the changes. We see the shifts and possibilities that are in front of us. And we have to be the ones who are willing to look to change as the very nature of life and the most exciting thing that can come our direction. Because to me, the most exciting thing that can come my way is when I see something in a way that I didn't see it before, my perspective changes. New perspectives. Exactly. You need new perspectives. You got to change your you got to change your prescription every once in a while, right? Your vision, Reverend Grace Lovejoy, everyone. Our vision changes. Right? And if your vision changes, you need a new prescription. You need a new way of seeing to allow yourself to see clearly. And much of the cultures that surround us are looking through old lenses. And you can't look at new things through old lenses. It doesn't work. Right? When you look to the world, you have to have a mythology and a belief that matches the world. And when your ideas do not match reality, it gets very mushy up in here, right? And a lot of fear and anger and turmoil emerges because things don't make sense, right? But if we're willing to be a people who recognize that the human brain thrives on change, right? It is when things change, it is when perspectives shift, it is when you see something in a different way or look at it from a different angle that your brain goes, new connections, neuroplasticity, new synapses, hooray! New ways of doing things, right? But when you're when you are constantly looking at things the same way and not allowing things around you to change, guess what? Those old patterns of thinking, of seeing and believing and perceiving get locked into place. And what happens when that default mode network, you've heard me talk about that before, it's locked in? Anxiety, depression, fear, overwhelm, all of these things come in because the brain needs to change, it needs to shift, it needs to evolve with what's changing around it, right? And all of our spiritual practices are about redirecting our perception, shifting from looking at the outside to looking at the inside, right? To asking the deeper questions. And recognize that when you're willing to look at things in new ways, that you can then be one who reveals whole new ways of seeing to those around you, right? And then we can engage in new conversations. We can bring forth new ideas. And, you know, our old buddy Einstein would remind us that you can't solve a problem with the same mind that created it. You have to step into a different way of thinking. You need a new perception, a new perspective. And so many of the issues of our current world have arisen from the last few generations or hundreds of years or thousands of years of thinking. We can't solve the problems that have emerged from that way of thinking with that thinking. We have to arrive at a new thought. Right? You love that, don't you? We have to arrive at a new thought, right? Which means we have to be having new thoughts, which means we have to be taking in new ideas so that we can think about different things, so that we can see things slightly differently. You know, if you had never seen an elephant before and you were standing behind one trying to figure out what it is, you'd have one perspective. You'd have to maybe take a step around to the side or look at the front to really see what this thing is all about, because from the back, it doesn't look the same as it does from the front. Right? And so we need to shift our perspective. We need to get out of our own thinking in some way in order to see things differently. Because when you can see it differently, whole new opportunities emerge. Right? When you step into a different mind, suddenly everything looks different. Right? We can look at the issues of the world on the TV or the newspaper or our phone, or we can look at them from the perspective of the James Webb Telescope. Right? Where you're looking from changes the field of vision, changes the perspective. Right? And so think of our spiritual practices as kind of like looking through that spiritual telescope and getting the widest vision possible, looking to evolution, looking to the life of the universe, looking to the shifting, changing energy that makes us up. And then from that place, look at the issues of the world. Look at the things that are going on in our lives, right? In synthesis, many of you have heard me use these terms, zoom in and zoom out. Right? When we zoom into a circumstance, it's like right here, and it looks really big. But when we zoom out, it gets smaller, and we see a greater perspective around what's happening. We have to be open to shift our perspective and change our own minds. Because we can remember that change is the one constant. The absolute truth of the universe is that it's always changing. The truth of you is that you are always changing. We are all always changing. And change is evolution. And the thing that I heard from a evolutionary biologist recently, which you've probably heard me say before, but I love this very much, we're starting to believe that evolution is not about survival of the fittest or the strongest or the most powerful. That evolution is about survival of the most adaptable to change. Right? And And if we recognize that that's the nature of nature, that that's how evolution evolves, then we can say, hey, there's an opportunity here. Let me become flexible. Let me become one who is able to move with the world and engage in this dance of creation and not just stand still in the midst of it all. Right? We can evoke something new when we bring new thoughts into our mind, but we have to be actively working on finding those new thoughts, on shifting our perspective, and being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Right? Because sometimes when we see something the way we did before, it might mean that we have to change. That something in us needs to change because it's a back and forth. And so we're doing this constant measuring, this constant looking, this constant dance of how am I responding and shifting and changing with change, and then what in me needs to change, and then back out and back in, right? So this whole month, we're going to be exploring this idea of using change and responding to it creatively, and recognizing that even in the most difficult times of change, there are also great opportunities in front of us. If we're willing to look for them, they will reveal themselves. So take a deep breath in. And I'm going to ask my ministers and practitioners to stand with me as I invite all of us to take another deep breath and just move into this time of remembering. First and foremost, above all things, that there is one seamless presence that is living and breathing throughout the entirety of the universe, the ever-changing, changeless, the one that is evolving, expanding, and becoming more of itself throughout all of space-time, within each one of us, in every interaction, in all that is unfolding, in all of existence, God and only God. And by God, I mean consciousness, life force, energy, that which is breathing my body and beating my heart, speaking these words, hearing these words. One life. It is the truth of who we are. And in that one, we are constantly shifting and changing and evolving and becoming more of ourselves. So let each one of us be a place where evolution is no longer an activity of chance and becomes an activity of choice. Let each one of us be a place where creation happens on purpose, where change is embraced as opportunities for newness. Let us recognize that each one of us has the power and the potential within us to be agents of change in our families, in our community, in our nation, and in our world. That when we change our minds, when we see in a new way, the entire world rearranges itself to match that new perception. And so let us build a collective consciousness that is so willing to call in the change that we are seeking, that we call it towards us through our choices, through our actions, through our intentions and attention. Let us change our minds. And let us change the world to be a place where we all see and know that there is an inherent spiritual magnificence not only in humanity, but in life itself. Let us reveal that truth everywhere we go, in everything we do. And in gratitude and in celebration, surrender to that change. And let it mold us. Let it make us what we are meant to be. Let God have its way with us. Evolve through us live through us. And so for all of this and so much more, I just give it my yes, and so it is. Thank you, friends. Jamie?